When the chaos of popular culture makes your brain hurt, you really need relief in the form of a transfusion of analysis and humor. It's time for a POPeration. Join hosts Eric and Stacey as they dissect pop culture, one bloody organ at a time. It's just what the doctor ordered.
Hello, I'm Stacey.
I'm Eric.
This is POPeration, and today we're going to talk about 1 year and 1 year only.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of my favoriteest years ever, and yet I wasn't even a sparkle in my parents' eyes.
Were your parents even a sparkle in their grandparents' eyes?
They were children. They were young children. 1939 is the year.
Yeah. My parents were not even born yet in 1939.
Really?
My parents were both born in 43. So, yeah, they were part of the baby boom.
Yeah, definitely.
And no, not even thought of in 1939.
So why do we like these?
Well, 1939 is widely regarded by film historians who don't really know why, was the best year for American movies ever. So many amazing movies came out of Hollywood.
Definitely the 30s were part of that golden age of films and Hollywood when they had learned a lot of their craft, certainly by the end of the 30s. So color was kind of new, and
not always used still.
No.
A lot of the best movies from 39 are not shot in color.
Correct, which is an interesting discussion in and of itself. But they knew what they were doing at this point as far as costumes and storytelling and just the technical aspects of creating a film.
Yeah, and probably just like editing things like how to frame a shot for, Hitchcock had not... Was Hitchcock there? He was
very early on, if he was, and he was over in England. I don't know if he was in Hollywood yet.
Okay, yeah. So, but there's certain auteurs.
No, he was, because there was A Lady Vanishes, which is an excellent movie, and that was a pre-World War II. So he was working, but he was working in England. He was not in Hollywood at the time.
Yeah. But, these auteurs who were just kind of playing around with, hey, if we shoot something from above, if we shoot it from below, if so-and-so is... what's the difference between a close-up and a mid-shot, and all of that stuff that what that means to a story that you're telling,
and using
what kind of
music.
Yes, scoring was a big thing, because when did talkies start? Really?
About 1928 or 29, somewhere right there.
So they were 10 years into
they were
making
only 10 years.
Movies with sound and all that movies can do. Obviously, didn't have the CGI capabilities that we have today, and yet. They really kind of figured out, finally at this point, how to make really good movies. And they made a lot of really good movies.
And I will say that a lot of people that I know that are my age have not seen these movies, and they haven't even heard of them, a lot of them. And again, you go back into my biography, I grew up watching them with my dad. So that's why I know them. So you want to just kind of rattle off a list of what happened in that 1 year?
Yeah, so here are some of the movies that were made in 1939. Ninotchka, Greta Garbo film. Stagecoach.
That's possibly one of John Wayne's best. It's one of my favorite of his.
Yeah, John Wayne is
Westerns
not
movie.
in my pantheon of favorites, but Stagecoach is a good film. Wuthering Heights, the Laurence Olivier, Merle Oberon. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Classic.
Yeah.
That's still quoted. I mean, that's still talked about now. And, of course, Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah. Only Angels Have Wings. Dark Victory, where Betty Davis goes blind. It's her big, post-Oscar win. She'd already picked up an Academy Award by this point. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. The real one, not the Disney cartoon.
No, very different take on the subject matter.
Yes. Gunga Din.
Oh my gosh, who wasn't in that? David Niven, Cary Grant. Yeah. I mean, that was an excellent.
Yeah. Goodbye, Mr. Chips, which probably is the most famous now for winning Best Actor, and Clark Gable didn't get it.
Correct.
So this guy got it instead. Love Affair, which has been remade a couple of times.
So many times. Sleepless in Seattle.
And Warren Beatty and Annette Bening did their version of Love Affair.
They did, and they just called it Love Affair.
They just called it Love Affair, yeah.
Right.
Babes in Arms, the Mickey, Judy in the barn.
That's
putting
right.
on a
We've
show.
got a barn. Let's do a show.
Yeah. The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex.
Speaking of Betty.
Betty Davis and Errol
Flynn.
Right?
In his prime.
Oh, gorgeous. And Intermezzo.
Fun fact about Intermezzo, because that is Leslie Howard. And the reason that he did Gone with the Wind, because you haven't mentioned Gone with the Wind yet.
Not yet.
But the reason he did Gone with the Wind is that he said, I will do Gone with the Wind, because he didn't want to do it, if you let me do Intermezzo.
Really?
Correct. And so they said, fine. And then there you go. That's why he was
Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind. So we can't talk about every great movie that was done in 1939. So we rattled off that list of movies where we're not really going to get that much more into in today's podcast. But we are going to delve deep into three that they're either really meaningful for film audiences or they're just meaningful to us personally.
And these are three that people have heard of. The ones we just rattled off, you may or may not have heard of those.
Yeah.
They have had a lot of effect on the movies you have seen.
Yes.
But you may not know that it came from some of these that happened in 1939. But yes, we're going to talk about three that you'll recognize the names of. But it's interesting because you have to put it into perspective. Why are all of these happening in the same year? How does that happen? And there were other good years back in 37, 38, and then on into the early 40s during the war. Very good movies were made at that time. But here in Hollywood, in the United States, there was a depression going on.
Yep.
And people needed escape.
Yeah.
Franklin Roosevelt was the president, and he was trying to figure out a way, and did, in the end, find out a way by us going to war kind of thing, to get us out of the depression. But we were still in it. It was not as bad as it was in 1935 and 6, but people still needed a reason. They needed something to look forward to, and they needed hope, which is, some
But there
of those...
was another recession in 1937. So the kind of really bad years of the Depression, then it kind of got a little bit, we're crawling out of this, but then 37 happens, and no, we're not. And now we're crawling out of it again. But you're right, we haven't gone to war yet, and there's this sense of,
but there's a lot
is
happening.
this ever going to end?
There's a lot happening in Europe.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're watching Europe, but the United States at the time wanted to be pacifist. I'm getting really political here, and I don't mean to be. But they wanted to stay out of the war, and FDR knew that. So, but we're watching, which some of these movies kind of...
Yeah. But you're right, there was trouble at home.
Shadow
Economically, there was this sense of dread. But Nazi Germany was in full swing. Kristallnacht, that night where they,
It already had Poland, I believe.
1938 was Kristallnacht, where they rounded up all those people. And people were hearing about this and very upset about it. So there was trouble at home, there was trouble abroad, and you're right, people needed to escape. And Hollywood was just booming at that point. A couple other things that happened in 1939, just, I did a Google.
Excellent. I know you do. I'm very proud of you right now.
LaGuardia Airport opened in New York in 1939. That was new. Superman, the comic book, first appeared on shelves.
1939.
In 1939.
And I think that if you think about what we just talked about historically, that makes sense. We were holding out for a hero.
Exactly. And early rumblings of what would later be the Civil Rights era. Marian Anderson famously sang at the Lincoln Memorial after being denied entrance to one of the performing arts halls here in D.C. She did an outdoor concert instead. She would not sing in Washington, D.C., so she just camped out at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. So right, in front of the great emancipator himself, sang this big... And so, things were happening. There was some... I just want to set some historical context for what we're about to talk about. To kind of get us back into the world of 1939.
Well, and I think, again, we were having to readjust how we were thinking. You're talking about Marian Anderson, African-American. We're having to readjust how we're thinking. If you look at the movies that we did rattle off, Stagecoach, which was John Wayne, probably the first one where he really shined and put his mark in to say, I'm going to be a star. And it was an ensemble piece. But there was a woman who was clearly a prostitute, and again, it was about seeing things differently. And he was, on one hand, he was this bad guy, had a reputation for it, but he was trying to clean up his, again, about changing how we're looking at things. You look at Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, clearly somebody's got to clean up Washington, and that's how the country felt, and they wanted to see that, and Jimmy Stewart was a perfect person to do it, and he just personified what America was.
And even when you took literature classics and decided to make movies out of them, Wuthering Heights is about this brooding, Heathcliff who no one takes seriously, but Kathy sees the humanity in him, seeing something in a different way. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, nobody can see the humanity in this grossly disfigured man, but the audience looks at how he's in love with this woman, Esmeralda, and sees him in a different light. So, yeah, that theme keeps coming over and over.
And I think that that's important. I think that it's really interesting and that we shouldn't overlook what is coming out of the film industry and television now, but at the time that movies was all that was the game, to see how it's reflecting what's going on in the country itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that the three movies that we're going to talk about do indeed show what was going on in the country to a certain extent.
Yeah.
If we don't get completely pretentious about it, which I hope we do.
Well, let's dive in.
Okay.
So movie number 1.
Okay, of the three, I'll be honest with you, this is one of my least favorite.
Okay.
It's not a favorite of mine.
But it's a hugely important
and
film.
everybody, I can't say that word enough. Everyone has heard of, has known this, and has probably seen it.
Yep.
The Wizard of Oz.
There you go.
It's not my favorite. It never has been. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I recognize it's a classic, and I recognize all the things about it, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, it was not originally a big hit. It kind of came and went. Like, okay, that was nice. However, according to the Library of Congress, is now the most widely seen film in history.
Well, at one point, they would show it, was it Christmas? There was
And
some
Easter.
holiday. Yeah, they would show it every year on television. And again, this is when we had only 3 networks, so there was no cable. But I remember that would get shown all the time. And is that part of why I don't like it? I think it may be The Witch and the Flying Monkeys. I'm not a fan. They remind me of those guys in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. The Kidnapper. Again, I'm not going to digress. I'm just going to say it's very ugly and scary. It's supposed to be.
Yeah.
I get that. But for some reason, but it's amazing. It has a lot of people in it, and it's, the music is wonderful. Judy Garland, amazing.
Yeah.
Vincent, it's a gorgeous film. It's a gorgeous film.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you say it's not your favorite. I do love it. I mean, it just is one of those things that because it's for the same reason it's part of the national imagination. It's just something that's so quotable. It's so relatable. You drop a line from The Wizard of Oz in any casual conversation, and people get it. It's a cultural piece of shorthand in that sense. But I do watch it as an adult and think, why does this work? It's so oddball.
It's so bizarre. It's very, very strange. The whole idea, I guess she's in a coma. I guess that's the idea. Dorothy's in a coma and goes to this place. That's one.
Yep.
Perception of what could be, or does she really go to this place?
Well, and it's full of all of this symbolism that L. Frank Baum, who wrote the book, his audience probably picked up on a lot of what he was doing. Oz, apparently, there's a theory out there that it's the when you say ounces and you kind of abbreviate that down to Oz, it's OZ. That it was all about the gold standard, and he was making some kind of statement about the gold standard, and it's not a coincidence that they come from Kansas, because it's about farming and industrialization and all of this social commentary he was making for a very specific period of time in the early 20th century that just makes no sense to us today. The Tin Man is apparently a stand-in for dehumanized factory workers that were turned into automatons because they were just asked to do, once we got into, this just somebody, all your job was to do is move this widget from the left to the right, and that's all you did all day long. That was kind of the first assembly line kind of a thing, and that's what the Tin Man was supposed to be. The Scarecrow was supposed to represent naive farmers.
Well, I thought the whole putting it in Kansas, to me, it tells you that you're talking about naive farmers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole idea. That's Americana.
Yeah. And the Cowardly Lion, some of his catchphrases were supposed to remind audiences that he was a stand-in for William Jennings Bryan at the time, a name we barely know today. Emerald City was supposed to be Washington, D.C., but it was painted green because it was all about greed. The Wizard was supposed to be Grover Cleveland, who was pulling the wool over everyone's eyes. I mean, it just, all of this stuff, and we don't care. Quite frankly, we watch The Wizard of Oz today, and none of that
we don't know any of that.
Anything. And I don't know that it meant much to Judy Garland and Burt Lahr and Ray Bolger and all the people who were making this movie. They were just making this coming-of-age kind of fantasy thing about a yellow brick road and a girl who wants to go home to Kansas.
And I think that's what, in the end, is what pulls us in, is that she just wants to get home to comfort, to family, to feeling safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's this journey, and no journey is easy, certainly not the journey of life. And no adventure is really truly an adventure unless you meet some conflict along the way. But it is interesting, Dorothy's really, really good, and the witch is really, 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 really bad.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very clear cut.
And although I will say the way that the wizard plays out, and please, we're not giving you any spoiler alerts for The Wizard of Oz. If you haven't seen The Wizard of Oz by now, we can't help you.
We can't help you.
The wizard, of course, turns out to be a fake. He turns out to be a phony. And the entire movie, when you're watching it for the first time, and I can't remember watching it for the first time. Mm-hmm. I knew the ending from the time I can remember watching The Wizard of Oz. But, of course, he's supposed to be the big savior. And he turns out to be just a charlatan, which you probably saw coming because in Kansas, the same actor played Captain Marvel, the fortune teller, who didn't know what the hell he was doing either. And that was an interesting device, right? It's a black and white and a color movie. All the actors who play these crazy characters in Oz also play characters in Kansas. Although Ma and Pa Gale or Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, they don't show up ever.
They don't show up.
But it is that, you're right. I think it's a coming of age story. It's a hero's journey. There's not a lot of moral ambiguity in there, but a little in terms of the wizard
I will say,
turns out to be
in
disappointing.
the stage play, I believe Annie M. is played by the same actor who plays Glinda the Good Witch.
That makes sense.
Just an FYI. So that does make sense.
But Billy Burke wasn't about to get up in a bunch of farm.
Oh, heck no.
She's like, I'll float in a bubble in a prom dress, but I am not about to dress up like some farmer's wife.
That's not happening, and I'm not running.
Hickory? No, she ain't gonna do that. She don't play that shit.
Billy Burke was very, very big at the time and a legend back certainly in the 20s and stuff like that.
And
just
a little long in the tooth by the time
she was, which is why they put her in a bubble so you couldn't quite see all the wrinkles. But I think that going back to the whole idea of the good and the bad, and the wizard ends up being a fraud and a con man at the end, all coming back to Dorothy and Glinda said, you had the power all along. Mm-hmm. It was yours,
and why didn't
it's
she
up
tell
to
her?
You.
That bitch.
Okay, that may be part of my problem. It's like, bitch, we just spent 2 hours with crazy monkey.
And I almost got my ass killed from a green-skinned wicked witch.
OG'd on opiates
in the poppy field.
And
you knew this wizard was full of shit.
And at the end of it, you say you just really had to clack your heels together.
And I gave you those shoes 2 hours ago.
2 hours ago.
And you get
No. So Glinda, maybe not so good.
I
know what
know.
I'm saying? But my point being is that a lot
Pop
of
that damn bubble and send you back to.
It was part of that whole idea of you as a person watching this. You have the power to control your destiny to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But that, I think, was what they were trying to say. Okay, you can't wait for this hero or somebody to save you. You've got to do it yourself.
And that says something
and
to
I think people
farmers
felt good.
in the age of industrialization
At that time,
or something.
People needed that. They needed to feel heroes themselves.
But the other thing, just the final note on The Wizard of Oz is, of course, what makes this movie amazing to me. Hello. Judy fucking Garland. She is. So we're going to do a show at some point about divas and the gay community because it's a big deal. But Judy is like the queen. The gay rights movement happened because the police decided to raid a gay bar 2 days after Judy Garland died, and the queens were not having it. Literally, you could put a lot of that right on her.
Well, I do know that if somebody sings for an audition or anywhere, they start singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, they better knock it out of the park. If I go see a production of Wizard of Oz, your Dorothy better be able to sing that song as well as Judy. No, I get it. Ain't nobody going to be able to do that except for a very few. But that is so iconic now that we expect nothing less than you can do anything you want with virtually any other song, but don't fuck with Somewhere Over.
Well, and she's a good singer. She has an iconic voice. Nobody sounded like her. The kind of richness of that alto coming out of that little girl was amazing.
Little Frances Gum.
And she's also a really terrific actor. I think one of the reasons why Somewhere Over the Rainbow works so well is that, it's a simple little song, and she's in her ridiculous gingham farm dress. But when she's looking up at the sky, and she's acting the hell out of that, and she sells it, and all of the entire storyline, really. I mean, it's a little quaint now. It's done in a style that, it's 1939, but she's a terrific actor. And always was, and I think really underrated for that. She's
so many of the divas are underrated for their acting because they were whatever the personification that they put on screen was, and you're going, they're going, that's not really me though. That's not who I am, and so they had issues. But people said, oh no, that's who you are. You're the dumb blonde, or you're, whatever it is you put up there, and yet they really were amazing actresses. But again, another show.
Yeah. But, we can't discuss The Wizard of Oz without kind of paying homage to Judy, who's just, makes the whole... Without Judy Garland, they were originally going to cast Shirley Temple.
I know.
As Dorothy.
I can't even imagine.
Well, it would not be the film that it would not be the most widely seen film
I agree
in history.
completely. I agree completely.
Had Shirley done it. Shirley was amazing. Shirley Temple was an amazing talent in a lot of ways, but not right for this, not right in the same way that Judy Garland was for that role.
Because, I think it needed some edge to it, and Shirley Temple did not have edge.
No. And Dorothy Gale is a little girl, but you kind of needed someone with a little bit of a grown-up sensibility to carry that entire film, and yet still be that sweet, innocent, coming of age.
No, I think they made the right decision, and I think that Shirley Temple would have been a very wrong choice.
Well, I don't think they made a decision. I think they couldn't get her.
Well,
I mean, Judy Garland was their second choice, but thank the stars for that one. So next on our list, one of my personal favorites.
I absolutely adore it.
I've seen this movie so many times, and it's horrible in a lot of ways. I mean, it's hard to watch with 21st century eyes, but it's The Women.
And we'll talk about that after the break because, it's awesome, but it is also awful. All right, we'll be back.
You're listening to POPeration with Eric and Stacey. Take a deep breath. This may sting a little.
And we are back.
We're back, and we're going to talk about The Women.
Because we're talking about 1939, and all of there were a lot of good movies that came out that year. And we talked about The Wizard of Oz, and now here is a favorite of both yours and mine.
Yep.
And it is extraordinarily descriptive. It's called The Women.
And what's interesting about The Women, the little piece of trivia that you always hear, all female cast. Norma Shearer, who both of us are kind of, she's fine. Joan Crawford, in her pinnacle.
Yep.
Rosalind Russell, hilarious. Paulette Goddard, who I just adore.
I adore. She's one of the best comedians. Talk about underrated. But,
Marjorie Main, big lesbian.
She played Ma Kettle in a bunch of... They had a series of movies, which astounds the hell out of me, because it just seems like an awful, awful premise. But she was a star.
Yeah.
She was a star.
And she's very funny. And then lots of other people. Joan Fontaine.
Men were talked about, but there was not one on the screen.
Not a single one.
Not even a waiter.
Even the animals they used in the movie.
Shut up.
Were all the horses were female. All the dogs were female. Remember the dogs
funny.
at the salon at the beginning? George Cukor, who directed this, said, as long as we're going to do this, let's go all the way. And not a single thing with a penis was on that screen for the entire movie, which made for some awkward sequences. So if you haven't seen The Women, you should. And quick rundown of the plot. A virtuous woman ends her marriage when her husband has an affair. And as soon as the marriage is over, realizes that she's made an awful mistake and she must get him back.
No, he left her.
No.
He was going to marry Joan Crawford.
No, he only married Joan Crawford because she dumped him after her mother told her not to.
After she found out. Okay, that's right. My bad.
He cheated on her, but he was not going to leave her because he cheated with a cheap floozy.
Right.
And her mother. So this is how awful The Women is. So the mother says, we are so much more sensible. When we have a midlife crisis, we just have the house redone. But men need to see themselves anew in some young woman's eyes. This will pass. Don't even worry about it. Mm-hmm. And Norma Shearer's like, what do you mean don't even worry about it? Like, this is infidelity. This is a big deal. And everyone around is like, it's not a big deal. Just ignore it. But she doesn't. She's a strong, independent woman of her day. So she goes to Reno to get a divorce. She has it out with him, and while she's having it out with him, of course, he can't be on the screen. We never see the husband.
No.
So the entire scene is played out between two of the kitchen help downstairs, as one of them is running upstairs to spy on the fight, and then running back downstairs and telling her fellow servant in the kitchen all that's going on, playing both parts, because, of course, we can't have a man on screen. So a little awkward at times, but more than makes up for it in terms of pure entertainment value.
And keep in mind, so this was a quickie divorce, and in order to do that, there were only certain places in the country you could go. Reno was one of those places, but you had to establish residency there. So you had to stay there, I think it was, I forget how many weeks. You had to be there in order to establish residency. Then you could get a quickie divorce. So there were these, you talk about capitalism, there were ranches that were expressly created for people who were there getting their residency while they waited to get a divorce.
Yeah, so of course when Norma Shearer goes off to Reno to get her divorce, she is greeted by half the cast of the women.
Correct.
Some of whom are new to you. You meet some people there. But some recurring characters that we were back in New York with the entire time, they show up in Reno too.
And that's where the female horses, the mayors, come in.
Yes. And so many great, what's so great about this movie, I think the dialogue is just so wonderful and quotable and bitchy.
Earlier in the 30s, there was a movie called Stage Door.
Yes.
And it was all women, too.
Ginger
now, there were
Rogers.
men, Ginger Rogers, Lucille Ball, who wasn't in that one? Eve Arden, that was a great one, too. But it reminds me, those are two of my favorite 30s decade movies.
Yeah.
And the thing about this one is you see why Joan Crawford was a star.
Uh-huh.
Because I've never been a huge fan, don't slap me, of Joan Crawford. She's fine. Her movies were always not necessarily anything I wanted to watch. And being a fan of Clark Gable that I was, I also didn't like the fact that she would not let him go. She got on my nerves about that. Keep in mind that I think was I born when they both died? I have no idea. I don't think I was. So, but I have really strong feelings about that relationship. Rosalind Russell, oh my gosh, who can deliver a one-liner, a sarcastic one-liner better than she? Nobody.
Well, and they weren't even one-liners half the time. My favorite line of hers in the entire movie was her friend Edith, who has a million children.
She's
all
always
girls,
pregnant. She's always pregnant.
And has a million girls, because you see them all, so they're all girls. She's upset about, saying something to a gossip columnist at some point, and she just made this awful mistake. And Rosalind's response is, "Oh, who cares, Edith? Remember all those awful things they said about what's her name before she threw herself out of a window? See, I can't even remember her name." Of course, she says that in about half the time that I just took to say that, because it's just this rapid-fire 1930s style.
And Rosalind Russell was extremely good. His Girl Friday, she was in that.
Yes.
Rosalind Russell rocked that fast delivery of one-liners with all of the feeling in it that it needed to have.
Yeah.
She was very, very good.
Yeah.
Paulette Goddard, who was at one point married to Charlie Chaplin for a hot minute, then she outgrew him. That's kind of what happened with him. They get too old and they have to move on to a younger one. But Paulette Goddard, talk about underrated, she never quite reached that pinnacle of huge stardom so that people don't know her name.
Yeah.
She was hysterical.
And she shows up about halfway through the movie. She's one of the women that we meet. Actually, we meet her on the train to Reno. When we meet the Countess de Love, who is this really over-the-top, woman who keeps on talking about l'amour, l'amour, l'amour. But Paulette Goddard is kind of this showgirl from New York who's also kind of on the train. And just so snarky, but played just to perfection. Yeah. She has my favorite line in the entire movie. Which is when they all come back from Reno. She's saying to Norma Shearer about Joan Crawford, who is the woman, by the way, who stole Norma Shearer's husband. Yeah. She's going to run into Joan Crawford, and they're both putting their makeup on in the mirror, and she says, "Do you want me to spit in her eye? You're passing up a swell chance, honey. Where I spit, no grass grows ever." Such a great, and you believe it. I mean, Yeah. Oh, and the other one was when the Countess de Love is upset, and she's, somebody else says, "Chin up," and Paulette goes, "Yeah, both of them." But probably the best line in the entire thing comes from the woman, and her name escapes me, who plays Norma Shearer's mother. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind, this is 1939. Mm-hmm. 1939. Keep that, yes.
And it's pre-war for America. It's not pre-war, unfortunately, for Europe.
And she's trying to make her daughter feel better about being single after so many years being a wife. Mm-hmm. And she says, being alone does have its advantages. Heaven knows it's lovely to be able to spread out in bed like a swastika. Which is just about the funniest thing in the world.
Oh my gosh. You could, it's awful, but it does tell you, again, you have to put it in the time period.
Yeah.
At the time, we weren't in the war, and that was a European problem. Yeah. Let the Europeans deal with that.
Yeah. It would be like Hitler, somebody making fun of Kim Jong-un today.
Correct.
Correct. Hopefully we won't be at nuclear war with North Korea by the time this podcast airs. But, Hitler was this ridiculous figure with a stupid mustache. He was not taken seriously
here in America by the most people. Clearly there were some people who understood what was going on.
And nobody liked him.
No,
but he was this idiot short guy with a dumb mustache.
That we figured would be we figured it'd be over soon. That was part of the joke. They did do a remake of this,
Oh God, awful. Nora Ephron, who I usually really
That was what
love.
Was shocking to me, that she decided to take it on, which when you see this movie, in my opinion, it cannot be made now. I don't think it can be done now in a modern setting. You could do it as a dated piece in 1930. You could probably even do it in the 40s if you wanted to move it. Maybe even the 50s because there were still, the misogyny thing. But I just don't think it can be done now. And when Meg Ryan and was it Annette Bening and
Deborah Messing,
wasn't Kathy Bates the Countess or whatever? Who was the
Bette Midler?
Bette Midler, sorry,
the
Countess. You just kind of roll your eyes and, are you serious? Are you serious? And it was awful, awful.
The reason
it had to be in 1939. That's what I'm saying.
Well, and the reason why the remake was so bad was because the movie is not kind to women. It's about women, but it really is. I mean, it shows kind of a
It's still a black and white. They are still caricatures.
Yes, and Nora Ephron wanted to do a feminist take on the story, and you cannot.
You cannot.
And so the ending of The Women, the remake, was the husband calls Meg Ryan back, and she agrees to go on a date to see how it goes. Okay, that's not a satisfying ending. But Nora couldn't have Meg rush back into his arms the way they do it in 1939 because it's seen as so degrading. And it is.
Because you wouldn't. Very few women would do that. It was, but again.
And Rosalind Russell's character is this, backbiting, double-crossing, backstabbing, horrible society. And they wanted to make Annette Bening's character nicer. So at some point they had this meeting of the minds and this whole big drawn-out apology.
It didn't work.
Not funny.
It didn't work.
Not funny.
No, it wasn't funny at all, but it didn't work.
And it didn't say anything.
A story, no.
It ended up saying nothing. By trying to say the right thing, it ended up just neutering the whole thing.
So I think that this is one of those that you really have to take in context, and it is part of 1939, and it is extremely funny, when you take it that it's in 1939, but you can't pull it to the future. I just don't think you can.
No.
Speaking of what can't be pulled to the future is
the big Mamma Jamma movie of 1939.
The one that won almost everything.
Except for Best Actor.
Correct, which I don't make me sad. Don't make me sad. We'll be back.
Open wide. It's your prescribed dose of POPeration with Eric and Stacey.
And we're back.
We are listening to POPeration, and we're talking about 1939 best movie year ever.
The most amazing year in film history, and we're about ready to talk about the movie that really made 1939 what it was.
And we talked about Wizard of Oz. We talked about The Women, and interestingly enough, there is a connection between The Women and the movie we're going to talk about, which is
Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind. Eric mentioned that George Cukor, the director of The Women, there were there was all female animals and everything there. And one reason I think he did that movie is that he had a reputation for being really good with female actors. And he was the original director for Gone with the Wind. Vivien Leigh loved him. Clark Gable hated him. And
was it because he was a big homosexual? That Clark Gable hated him?
That may be in part of it. I wasn't there. I don't know. I like to think that Clark was open to all LGBT before there was LGBT. We're not going to speak ill of Clark Gable today. There were a lot of issues, a lot of conflict. So George went the way of all flesh, and it came to Victor Fleming, who was known as a man's man director. And
how was Vivian with that?
Hated it. But she hated Clark Gable, so anybody that he had, asked to be there, she would have had a problem with. But Clark had more clout at the time than Vivian Leigh.
Well, because Vivian Leigh was an unknown.
Yes, in America. She had done a few things.
And she was already Mrs. Olivier, yes?
Was she? I think
she
so.
was.
I think she was. Yes.
Because Lawrence visited the set at some point.
Yes.
Anyway, Gone with the Wind. Epic movie. The running time of this film is 3 hours and 58 minutes.
Yeah, that's 4 hours.
I'm not sure if that includes the intermission.
It probably doesn't, and there's usually a 15-minute intermission. When you go see it in a theater, there's usually a 15-minute intermission in there.
Because the lines for the bathroom are that long.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, it is an epic, and that was what it was created to be. It was based off of one of the hottest books ever.
Yeah.
Margaret Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind, and it was huge success. Huge success. It was scandalous. In the book, the character Scarlett O'Hara, who is the protagonist throughout, she is not portrayed as necessarily a nice person or your innocent ingenue.
No.
Ever. Fairly honest. She is not pretty, but she's very conniving and she's very driven.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes through her life. She goes through 3 husbands and children with each of them, and that's in the book. And it's just this roller coaster ride of going through pre-Civil War, through the war itself, Reconstruction, and right after that. And so you're getting you get a taste of how Southerners felt about. And keep in mind, this is less than 100 years from when the Civil War ended.
Yes. And
so there were people that were old, but there were people that, some of them, were either they were old or they were, little babies when the Civil War started. I mean, there were people that were alive when that was going on.
Yeah.
So it is an epic, and it was meant to be. They had so many extras. I mean, when you see it, it is the most amazing thing that they have. Everything was top notch.
And you have to remind yourself when you watch it now that these are not extras that were added in by computer after it was over.
No. There is one scene where they're in Atlanta, and Scarlett has gone to the hospital because that's what rich women in the South did during the war. Is they went to the hospitals and helped all of the wounded veterans. But she's looking for one specific person, and they have them laid out, these men, these wounded men, laid out on the ground outside. And the camera angle is, I don't even know how they did it back then. I don't know that they didn't have drones, but that's how you would do it now, because it starts with her, and it's a close-up of her, and then it starts just zooming out and just going up higher and higher and higher until you can see she's walking. It is the most amazing. It's this forest, if you will, of men lying, and there has to be hundreds of them.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
and they're
shot.
all in costume.
Mm-hmm. And it must have been on some enormous crane.
It was a crane. It was a crane shot.
But
for sure.
But they must have built it for this movie, because no one had ever tried to take a wide shot like that.
Yeah, it was an amazing thing. So there were a lot of things, and so there were technical advances that this movie dealt with also. But she was not. And I think that's what made it kind of scandalous, is that she was not your typical goody-goody heroine.
No, not at all. I mean, the iconic scene with her, right, and I believe this happens right before the intermission when you see it at the theater, is when she's really down on her luck and she puts her fists up to the heavens and says, "I will not go hungry again." Mm-hmm. And damn it, she is not going to take any shit from that point forward. Not that she took much in the beginning. She didn't
in the beginning, but she also thought it was going to come to her easier than it did. And when she realized, I'm going to have to work for it, that's when her drive changed.
Yeah. And long before Julie Andrews sewed curtains into cute little outfits for those little tykes, she was doing that.
Of course,
every time I think about that, I can only think about Carol Burnett with the big curtain rod
Correct.
through her shoulders, making such
I saw
fun
it
of that.
in the window, says Carol Burnett.
And had to have
it.
But, in 1939, to see somebody who is that much of a Southern belle actually just take curtains off the wall and make, a dress out of it, to us just seems like ingenuity. But, I mean, it really was kind of she was
scandalous in a lot of ways because she was, and even in the story, people considered Scarlett O'Hara scandalous because of how she behaved. She didn't behave like a proper young lady would.
No.
And I think that was part of the fun of reading it. Now, I will tell you this. My mother said my mother was 5 when it came out in 1939, but the book came out 2 or 3 years earlier. And my mother said that her mother, my grandmother, would not let her read the book. And that was when my mom was 12. That was after the movie had come out and all that, because it was scandalous.
Wow.
And when you read it, though, it's nothing. There aren't really sex scenes, per se. She doesn't have descriptive sex scenes.
No.
It's implied,
She had
in there.
children by 3 different men.
Correct. But it is one of those that I think it really resonated. Again, it goes to that thing we're talking about, 1939. You're going to have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
You're going to have to, if life gives you lemon, make your own lemonade. And I think that when you put it in that perspective, that's what Scarlett did.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, not nearly as many people have seen Gone with the Wind as have seen The Wizard of Oz. Not nearly.
That makes complete sense to me.
But when you adjust for inflation, it is still the most successful film in box office
Because
history.
at the time, it was so successful. I mean, Wizard of Oz has been shown on free TV 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the 70s that Gone with the Wind was actually on TV for the first time. And I boycotted it because Olivia de Havilland, who played Melanie Wilkes in Gone with the Wind, told me to. Yeah,
Really?
Putting commercials, we were appalled putting commercials into Gone with the Wind. Now, having said this, I did enjoy it as a little white girl growing up in Tennessee and going to see this epic that had been, that was at this point, 40, 50 years old. I will tell you now that I have not made my daughters see it because it doesn't hold up as well as Wizard of Oz because of the racial.
Yeah, so where the women
overtones.
had some of its some issues around misogyny, this movie has its own issues around race. Prissy, who don't know nothing about birth and no babies. That's kind of a disturbing characterization of.
Well, there's a lot that's disturbing. It also which Birth of a Nation, way back in the day, it was a silent movie. It also made the KKK out to be heroic.
Yeah.
And while they never named the group that goes to clean up the poor section of town at one point in Gone with the Wind, they never named it. It's a bunch of white guys. It's a bunch of white gentlemen. It's a KKK. And they're going out there because Scarlett got attacked because she's an idiot. She got attacked. And so the white men had to go and deal with her honor. And so they go that night. And there's a scene where that you don't go with them. That's just you're watching the women waiting for the men to come back from that raid. And it's the KKK. There's nothing good about them.
No, it's icky.
And yet,
at this point.
that's where in 1939 it wasn't seen, But that's what she did throughout all of this movie, which is one reason why I don't force anybody to watch it.
Yeah.
There are classics I make my children watch, but not that, because it really does make, all slave owners were really just taking care of those people that didn't know how to take care of themselves.
Yes, after they came over on their luxury liner. Thank you,
they were
Ben
invited.
Carson.
Yeah. So it's very, very
they came
hard
to America
watch.
to make a better life for themselves. Thanks, Ben
It's
Carson.
very, very hard to watch. But I do remember.
little piece of trivia there too. Hattie McDaniel
Yes.
was the first black person to win an Oscar.
Correct.
Everyone always says, one Best Supporting Actress, and everyone thinks, well, Olivia de Havilland must have an Oscar for Gone with the Wind. She does not. It went to Hattie McDaniel, who also, if you watch the film closely, refused to trim her lovely long nails while making this film. Mammy has the slickest manicure you have ever seen, and she wouldn't do it. She would wear the stupid, thing on her head. She would wear the maid's costume and the apron. She would speak like, Miss Scarlett, yes, Miss Scarlett, know him. And she had these gorgeous nails, and she sat in the back of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, which was segregated at the time, with all the black people. But she marched all the way up there and picked up that Oscar. The Academy gave it to her.
Yes, and they should have. She was amazing in that. And while she is playing a slave, most parts, I think at the end she's freed. But she is amazing at it. She's hysterical. Her comic timing, absolutely undeniable. Yeah. Unfortunately, I will say this one little thing about it. When she did give her Oscar speech, it had been written for her by the producers.
Yes.
So unfortunately, she didn't get to say what she really wanted to say.
No, and she talked about, I hope I am a credit to my race, which
Correct.
is still a little, but nonetheless, you can't talk about 1939 and film history without talking about Gone with the Wind.
Correct, and I think that even though the fact is that Gone with the Wind and The Women both probably should stay in 1939,
yes,
as opposed to some of the other ones that can watch them now and you don't cringe as much. I think that it is, again, you have to look at your history and see where you are, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah.
And but I don't know. So why did all of these wonderful movies come out in the same year? What?
Yeah, our final diagnosis on 1939 is who the hell knows, but thank the stars that we have all of these great
Most
films.
Most definitely. And we got some great performances from people. It is a great piece of Hollywood history. It was a great year for that, and you talk about binging. You could just spend a whole weekend, a whole week, just binging on the good movies from 1939.
Yes, there were probably some stinkers, but we don't know much about them.
And we're not going to talk about
them. So much wealth there. So I will say, if you're going to listen to this podcast and be inspired, you've probably already seen The Wizard of Oz. Gone with the Wind is a big investment, and you should see it as an adult who knows historical history.
Yes.
But go watch The Women today. Just hilarious. You will have a great time.
You've been listening to POPeration with Eric and Stacey. Check out our website at poperationroom.com for links to our blog and other extras. Don't forget to subscribe to POPeration via iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, and other podcast locations. You can also follow @POPeration Room on Facebook and Twitter. Music provided by PurplePlanet.com.